Okay, so we'll take a short sort of sidestep and take a look at something that's extremely useful in JavaScript, but obviously not fundamental to how you would run an application or actually write any code. And that is commenting, which is extremely useful because as part of a development team or as a developer on your own, it's so important to comment code that you're writing so you understand how it works, not only now but when you or someone else refers back to it later on. So code commenting is really good for learning as well, because as you comment your code, you're sort of clarifying what you're writing as well. And again, if you go back to your code in the future and you haven't commented it, it does take a long time to try and understand how your code actually works, or what it's doing. So we'll be looking at a couple of ways that we can comment code in JavaScript, and then we'll look at the HTML way that we can comment code, just to sort of wrap things up. We don't really need to talk about this, but it's useful anyway. So inside of our application, let's say we were going to create a couple of variables. So I'm going to say name equals Alex, age equals 24. So up here I can do one of two things. I can do block commenting or I can do line commenting. Now block commenting is more appropriate for larger chunks of code where you need to write perhaps multiple lines. It is personal preference of how you read it best or how you think it looks best. But personally, if I'm writing more than a couple of lines, I really like to, or even more than one line, I like to use block commenting. Now, single line commenting is fine for things like this. So, for example, define a few variables about the person. So here it just describes it really easily. 2 forward slashes. You see that my text editor that I'm using colors this in a blue color, so we sort of know that it's separate to the rest of our code. So this is 2 forward slashes, then anything after this on that particular line will be commented. If I was to go down here and start writing more out, this isn't commented out. So it's just on this line that it's commented. Now we don't just have to do that before this line, we could do it after. So define the name. We could then do define the age. This looks quite nice if you are doing lots of variables perhaps and you want to put a little side note next to it. But if you want to do a large chunk of text, what do you do? Well, as I've already mentioned, if you wanted to, you could say these are a few variables that relate to a person. Now, if this was the case, I find this particularly difficult to read, and I think it looks messy with these two or these 4 forward slashes here. So what you can do is you can do a forward slash and an asterisk, come down a couple of lines, an asterisk, and another forward slash, and then in here you can write these are a few variables about a person. You could pull this in here. You could do something like this, which is quite common. You can do anything really. This looks particularly nice for the top of a page where you're maybe describing what this code does, or the author, or the date that it was last modified. But basically the way that you comment, as long as you're commenting in a sort of sensible way, so it looks readable, that's the main thing. Again, it's personal preference. Now, the main thing to work out is what you should and shouldn't comment as well. I'm not going to say name, and I'm not going to say age. And the reason being is that looking at this, it's absolutely obvious what these variables are, because part of variable naming convention, I want to name variables so they actually make sense. So by commenting things like this, it just clutters the page and it's a complete waste of time. Even really commenting this all together would probably be a waste of time, because it doesn't really make much sense to comment something like this. So the few key tips are: comment on a line-by-line basis if you have, or with block comments if you have a lot to write. If you have a little bit to write, just use the 2 forward slashes, and don't comment things that don't need commenting, particularly if they're things like variable declarations, unless it's absolutely necessary that you explain why a variable is being declared or where it's used on a page. There are probably circumstances where this does make sense. But the main thing to do is, if you do struggle to write some code and you come to some kind of revelation about writing a particular piece of code, comment it well, comment it sensibly, so that when you return to it, or when someone else returns to your code, whether that be someone across the other side of the world or someone as part of your team looks at it, they can look at it and immediately understand what's going on through comments. So it's nice to have just comments flowing down the page, just to sort of introduce each sort of section of your application, just so it makes sense to anyone looking at it, or yourself referring back to it after a long period of time.